The cursor on the screen darted wildly into the corners, completely out of control. Tu Na was gripping the small plastic computer mouse so hard her knuckles turned a stark white, holding it with the same rigid tension she used for a heavy iron garden trowel. She held her breath, her eyes narrowed at the glowing monitor, finally managing to hover the tiny arrow just over the save button. Then the crash echoed through the quiet wooden house. A blue plastic cup tipped over the edge of the desk. Cold white milk spilled rapidly across the dark, polished wood, racing toward the expensive mechanical keyboard, missing the vital electronic keys by a mere inch. Tu Na froze. Her hands, calloused, capable hands that spent every morning pulling weeds from the damp soil and lifting heavy wooden crates of harvested vegetables, were suddenly paralyzed by a fragile piece of technology. Underneath the desk, the rapid slapping sound of little rubber sandals echoed as Henry, bored and full of morning energy, scrambled out of the room. He had bumped the table leg just hard enough. Hello again, friends. Welcome back to our home, where life is beautiful, but rarely perfectly quiet. If you've been with us for a while, you know Alex and Tu Na usually face their challenges out in the sun, knee-deep in the soil. But today, the hardest ground to break is right here inside our own living room. The white puddle of milk was expanding quickly, soaking into the grain of the wooden desk. Tu Na had spent the last 2 days trying to transition a decade of handwritten farm records into this confusing, glowing machine. Now, watching the milk creep closer to the hardware, she realized that learning the digital world wasn't just frustrating. It felt dangerously fragile. If that liquid touched the wrong wire, all of her exhausting, tear-filled work from the past 48 hours would simply vanish. The morning had started as it always did, anchored by the familiar, comforting rhythm of our farm. Outside, the bamboo gate creaked gently in the early breeze, and the faint, sweet smell of wood smoke from Ba Tang's morning fire still drifted through the open kitchen windows. The world outside was perfectly in order, but inside the home office, a small corner carved out of the living space, crammed between stacks of folded laundry and Henry's toy wooden blocks, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. Tu Na had pushed a half-eaten bowl of Henry's morning rice porridge to the far edge of the desk just to make room for the mousepad. She was trying to do 2 impossible things at once: learn a completely foreign skill and remain a present, attentive mother to a restless toddler. The collision of these 2 worlds was inevitable. The farm demanded physical endurance, but this new digital administration required a delicate, invisible patience she felt she simply didn't possess. The quiet morning peace of the wooden house had entirely evaporated, replaced by the suffocating feeling of rising panic. The spilled milk continued its slow, deliberate crawl toward the edge of the keyboard. For a split second, Tu Na just stared at it. It wasn't just milk, it was a physical manifestation of her own inadequacy, a messy reminder that she felt she didn't belong behind this pristine screen. With a sharp intake of breath, she broke her paralysis. She reached frantically to her left, grabbing the thick, faded cotton cooking apron she had tossed over the back of the wooden chair just an hour earlier. She bunched the rough fabric into a thick knot, leaning awkwardly over the desk to build a temporary dam between the spreading white puddle and the expensive electronics. But in her desperate rush to protect the machine, the very hands that knew how to perfectly space a row of fragile seeds betrayed her. As she swept the heavy apron across the desk, the heel of her hand came down hard on the bottom corner of the keyboard. There was a sharp, unnatural clicking sound. Then the screen flickered. The neat, organized rows of the spreadsheet, the numbers that represented months of sweat, rain, and harvest, instantly vanished. The monitor flashed once, violently bright, before settling into a terrifying, empty, solid blue screen. The sudden absence of the spreadsheet was louder than the initial crash of the cup. The soft hum of the computer's cooling fan continued, entirely indifferent to the disaster. Tu Na slowly pulled her trembling hand away from the keys, clutching the milk-soaked apron against her chest. She didn't know what she had pressed. She only knew the rules of the physical world. If you drop a clay pot, it shatters. If you step on a young sapling, it snaps. By that logic, slamming a hand onto a fragile machine could only mean one thing. She was completely convinced she had just destroyed it all. Every single line of farm data, every financial record they had meticulously gathered over the past month, erased in a single clumsy second. The heavy weight of the mistake settled directly onto her shoulders. Outside the window, the steady, rhythmic chirping of the summer cicadas carried on, creating a harsh contrast to the breathless silence that had taken over the room. She looked down at her calloused fingers, still slightly stained with dirt around the nail beds, and felt a profound, burning sense of shame. She had tried to step out of the garden to build a better future for their family, and in her mind, she had just ruined it. The blue light cast a cold, unnatural glare across the small home office, washing out the rich, hand-carved wooden walls that usually made this room feel so warm. Tu Na stood completely frozen. The silence that followed the screen's sudden death felt heavier than the 50-pound sacks of organic fertilizer she carried across the fields every spring. The milk had finally stopped spreading, now just a stagnant white pool soaking slowly into the delicate grain of the desk. From the hallway, Henry slowly peeked his head back around the wooden doorframe. Even at 3 years old, he could instantly sense the sudden shift in the room's atmosphere. The restless, playful energy drained completely from his small face. His dark eyes grew wide and cautious as he stared at his mother's stiff, unmoving posture. The instinct to flee, to run back out to the familiar dirt and sun, was overpowering. Out in the garden, a mistake was physical and honest. If the soil was too dry, you hauled water from the well. If a sudden summer squall knocked down the climbing tomato vines, you simply knelt in the mud and tied them back up with bamboo twine. The earth always offered a second chance if you were willing to sweat for it. But this glowing, unforgiving monitor felt like a trap. The silent realization hit her deeply. She assumed her single clumsy mistake had permanently erased a full month of their family's careful counting. Was this forced shift to digital tracking even worth the anxiety it brought into their quiet home? Tu Na let out a slow, shaking breath. Her rough hands dropped the damp, milk-stained apron onto the floorboards. With defeated, heavy steps, she walked over to the doorframe and scooped Henry up into her arms. He instinctively wrapped his small arms around her neck, resting his cheek tightly against her shoulder. She turned her back on the desk, fully prepared to walk away from the digital world and surrender entirely. Before she could cross the threshold into the hallway, a tall shadow fell across the sunlit doorway. Alex stood there, a coil of muddy irrigation tubing slung over his shoulder, having just returned from checking the water pressure in the lower vegetable beds. He paused, his calm eyes taking in the entire scene in a matter of seconds. The overturned plastic cup, the dripping desk, the glaring blue monitor, and his wife, who looked smaller than she ever did beneath the open sky, holding their son like a shield. In a family business, this is the fragile moment where everything can pivot. When sudden chaos strikes inside the household, the easiest and most common reaction is to assign blame. The mess was obvious. The ruined work seemed undeniable. But Alex didn't say a single word. He didn't sigh heavily, and he didn't stare at the spilled milk with frustration. He quietly set the muddy agricultural tubes down on the porch outside, wiped the wet earth from his boots, and stepped over the threshold. The wooden floorboards creaked softly under his familiar, steady weight. He walked right past Tu Na, his rough hand briefly and warmly pressing against her shoulder as he passed. It was a silent, physical anchor in her storm of panic. Reaching the desk, he didn't rush. He picked up the discarded apron from the floor, neatly folded the dry side outward, and methodically wiped away the remaining puddle of milk, making sure not a single drop had reached the vulnerable wires underneath. Then he leaned forward over the keyboard. His hands were just as calloused as hers, the skin deeply lined with years of gripping iron hose and handling rough timber. But as he looked at the terrifying blue screen, there was no hesitation in his posture. He pressed a very specific combination of keys, a slow, deliberate physical effort born from the late nights he had spent quietly reading the manual while she slept. The machine clicked. The cold blue suddenly vanished, replaced instantly by the warm, white background of their spreadsheet. The neat, organized rows of numbers, the exact yield of their winter squash, the carefully calculated costs of the new seeds, sat exactly where she had left them. Tu Na let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The rigid tension visibly melted from her slumped shoulders. She watched her husband's steady hands pull back from the machine, a quiet tear finally escaping down her cheek. The wall she had built between her physical labor and this new task cracked open. In that silent room, the practical lesson became clear. Partnership doesn't mean avoiding every spill. It means having someone step in to absorb the panic when you simply cannot carry it alone. The afternoon sun shifted through the open window, casting a warm golden glow across the damp desk and illuminating the soft dust motes dancing in the quiet air. Alex turned away from the glowing, recovered spreadsheet and reached out, gently lifting Henry from Tu Na's arms. He settled the boy firmly onto his own lap, acting as a steady, physical anchor for the toddler's boundless, restless energy. Henry rested his head against his father's broad chest, his small body instantly calming in that safe embrace. With a soft nod, Alex gestured toward the empty wooden chair. Tu Na slowly sat back down, the heavy ghost of her previous panic still lingering in her tense posture. The hidden cost of trying to modernize a life is the cruel, unspoken myth of the perfectly quiet workspace. We so often believe that learning administration requires sterile silence, entirely detached from the unpredictable reality of raising a child. But for a family farm, work happens directly in the middle of life. Learning to manage these new digital tools means accepting that toddlers will run, cups will spill, and the daily workflow will be loudly interrupted. The goal of this difficult transition was never to achieve a state of flawless, sterile perfection. It was to build adaptable, resilient progress. Alex pointed a calloused finger toward the monitor. The farm didn't collapse when the heavy monsoon rains flooded the lower beds last year, he told her, his voice low and incredibly gentle. And this machine won't collapse just because you pressed the wrong button. We learn the seasons, and we will learn this. The tight tension finally drained completely from the small room, replaced by the familiar, comforting warmth that usually filled their wooden house. Tu Na took a deep, steadying breath, letting the quiet peace wash over her. She reached out and placed her hand back over the small plastic mouse. This time, her grip was loose, relaxed, and entirely without fear. With a soft click, she pressed save one more time, securing their hard-earned progress. Her free hand reached across the space between them, softly stroking Henry's dark hair as he began to fall asleep against Alex's chest, lulled by the steady, rhythmic heartbeat of his father. She had finally stopped fighting the unfamiliar digital world, accepting that it could peacefully coexist alongside the dirt and sun of their farm. The deeper truth of providing for a family is that mastering a new skill isn't about avoiding the messy mistakes. It is about learning how to calmly correct them together, side by side. Tomorrow will bring new rows of harvest numbers to enter, and perhaps another spilled cup to clean, but the heavy, paralyzing fear of the unknown is finally gone. Because true growth never happens in a perfectly quiet room. It happens right in the middle of the beautiful, noisy mess of building a life together. Have you ever felt overwhelmed trying to learn a new skill while balancing your family's daily life? Share your experience with us in the comments below. We love reading your thoughts, so leave a comment and let us know how you handle the messy, beautiful moments in your own home.